The fall of Zephyria. The acrid smell of burning metal and scorched earth filled Krell's nostrils as he dragged his battered body across the desolate landscape of Zephyria. Once a thriving world of crystalline spires and lush purple forests, his home planet now lay in ruins, a testament to the destructive power of the galactic war that had raged for decades. Krell, a proud warrior of the Zephyrian Guardian Corps, had never imagined he'd see his world reduced to ashes. His iridescent scales, once a brilliant blue, were now dulled and caked with grime and blood. One of his 4 arms hung limply at his side, a deep gash running from shoulder to elbow. Each labored breath sent waves of pain through his chest, where a piece of shrapnel had lodged itself dangerously close to his primary heart. As he crested a hill of rubble, Krell's compound eyes took in the full extent of the devastation. The capital city of Luminara, once home to millions, was now nothing more than a sprawling graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams. In the distance, the remnants of the planetary defense shield flickered weakly, like the last gasps of a dying beast. Krell's antennae twitched, picking up faint electromagnetic signals, distress beacons, perhaps, or the last cries of failing machinery. But of his people, there was no sign. No movement stirred the ash-filled air. No voices called out in the eerie silence that had fallen over the world. As the realization of total defeat settled over him, Krell's legs gave out, and he collapsed to the ground. He thought back to the beginning of the war, when the Zephyrians had stood proud and united against the encroaching threat of the Terran Alliance. Humans, those strange, soft-skinned bipeds from a distant arm of the galaxy, had expanded rapidly, their insatiable hunger for resources bringing them into conflict with the established powers of the sector. The Zephyrians, along with their allies, had believed their superior technology and evolutionary adaptations would ensure a swift victory. How wrong they had been. The humans, for all their physical frailty, possessed a tenacity and ingenuity that had taken the galaxy by surprise. Their tactics were unpredictable, their strategies bold to the point of recklessness, and their ability to adapt to new challenges seemed to know no bounds. Year after year, the war had ground on. World after world fell, either to occupation or orbital bombardment. The mighty Zephyrian fleets, once the pride of the sector, were whittled down by guerrilla attacks and daring raids. And now, here at the end, even mighty Zephyria itself had fallen. Krell's eyes drifted to the sky, where the last remnants of the space battle still played out. A Zephyrian dreadnought, its hull breached in a dozen places, tumbled slowly through the atmosphere, trailing fire and debris. He watched as it disappeared beyond the horizon, knowing that with its fall, the last hope of his people had been extinguished. As the twin suns of Zephyria began to set, casting an eerily beautiful orange glow over the ruined landscape, Krell found himself faced with a choice. His warrior's training told him that capture was unacceptable, that he should take his own life rather than fall into enemy hands. And yet, a smaller voice, one that spoke of duty and responsibility, urged him to survive, to bear witness to what had happened here, to ensure that the memory of Zephyria and its people would not be lost to the uncaring void of space. With a groan of pain and effort, Krell pushed himself back to his feet. He would not die here, not today. He would find a way to survive, to heal, and perhaps one day, to understand how it had all gone so terribly wrong. As night fell, Krell made his way towards the ruins of a research facility on the outskirts of Luminara. If any supplies or equipment had survived the bombardment, that would be the place to find them. Each step was agony, but he pushed on, driven by a determination he hadn't known he possessed. The facility's main building had partially collapsed, but some sections seemed intact. Krell navigated the darkened corridors, his eyes adjusting to pick up traces of residual heat and energy signatures. In what had once been a medical bay, he found a cache of emergency supplies, nutrient packs, water purifiers, and most importantly, a portable regeneration unit. Krell activated the unit with shaking hands, feeling the warm tingle of its healing energies begin to knit his wounds. It wasn't much. The device was designed for minor injuries, not the extensive damage he had suffered, but it would keep him alive for now. As the regenerator did its work, Krell's mind drifted to the future. What would become of him now? The war was over, his civilization in ruins. Would he spend the rest of his days as a scavenger, eking out a meager existence among the wreckage of his former life? Or would the humans eventually return to occupy the planet, forcing him into hiding or captivity? A distant rumble shook Krell from his thoughts. At first, he feared it was another bombardment, but as he listened closely, he realized the sound was coming from the ground, not the sky. An earthquake? No, it was too rhythmic, too regular. It almost sounded like. Krell's heart raced as he recognized the pattern. Mining machines. Deep beneath the surface of Zephyria lay vast deposits of rare minerals and exotic materials, resources that had been part of the reason for the war in the first place. Now, with the planet's defenses destroyed and its population gone, someone was wasting no time in claiming those riches. Anger flared within Krell, hot and fierce. He had lost everything: his home, his people, his very way of life. And now the victors were already picking over the bones of his world like carrion birds. In that moment, a new purpose crystallized in his mind. He would not merely survive, he would resist. Even if he was the last Zephyrian left alive, he would make the invaders pay for every gram of treasure they tried to steal from his homeworld. With renewed determination, Krell gathered what supplies he could carry. He didn't know how long he could hold out against the full might of the Terran Alliance, but he would make his last stand count. As he prepared to leave the relative safety of the research facility, a flicker of movement caught his eye. In a shattered holo display, Krell saw his own reflection for the first time since the final battle. He barely recognized himself. His once proud crest was torn and ragged, his scales dull and scarred. But in his eyes, there burned a fire that had not been there before, a fire of defiance, of survival against all odds. Krell straightened his back, ignoring the pain that shot through his body. He was no longer just a defeated warrior of a fallen civilization. He was the last guardian of Zephyria, and he would not go quietly into the night. With a final look at the ruins of his past, Krell stepped out into the darkness, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Little did he know that fate had plans for him far beyond the blasted wastes of Zephyria. Plans that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, his enemies, and the very nature of the conflict that had consumed his world. An unexpected rescue. The U.S. horizon drifted silently through the debris field that surrounded Zephyria, its sensors probing the devastation for any signs of life. Captain Elena Reyes stood on the bridge, her dark eyes scanning the holographic display that showed the ruined planet below. She had seen the aftermath of battles before, but never on this scale. "Any life signs, Lieutenant Chen?" she asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. The young sensor officer shook his head. "Nothing definitive, Captain. There's too much interference from residual radiation and electromagnetic disturbances." "Wait." His console beeped insistently. "I'm picking up something faint. It could be a glitch. But plot a course," Rise ordered without hesitation. "If there's even a chance of survivors, we have to investigate." As the horizon descended through Zephyria's atmosphere, the true extent of the destruction became apparent. Vast swathes of the planet's surface had been reduced to glass by orbital bombardment. The remnants of once great cities jutted from the scorched earth like broken teeth. "My God," whispered Commander Jack Foster, the ship's XO. "How could we have done this?" Rice didn't answer. The war had been long and brutal, with atrocities committed on both sides. But seeing the results up close made all the propaganda and justifications feel hollow. The ship touched down near the source of the faint signal. Rise led the away team herself, accompanied by Dr. Amelia Okoye, the ship's chief medical officer, and a squad of Marines for security. As they picked their way through the ruins, Rise couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she found herself constantly checking their surroundings. Over here, Dr. Okoye called out suddenly. She was kneeling beside a pile of rubble, her medical scanner whirring. I've got life signs. Faint, but definitely there. The Marines moved in, quickly but carefully clearing away the debris. What they uncovered made them all take a step back in shock. Lying unconscious amidst the wreckage was a Zephyrian warrior. Its blue scales were dulled with dust and blood, and one of its 4 arms was clearly broken. But it was alive. "Captain," one of the Marines said nervously, "what are your orders?" Rice stared at the alien, her mind racing. The war was over, but old hatreds died hard. This creature's people had been responsible for the deaths of millions of humans. Protocol dictated that any enemy combatants should be taken into custody. But as she looked at the broken form before her, Rice saw not an enemy, but a victim, a survivor of a catastrophe that no sentient being should have to endure. "Dr. Okoye," she said finally, "can you stabilize it for transport?" The doctor nodded, already prepping a stasis field. "I'll do my best, Captain. But I've never treated a Zephyrian before. Their physiology is complex." "Do what you can," Reyes ordered. She tapped her communicator. "Horizon, this is the captain. Prepare sickbay for a critical patient, and inform command that we found a survivor." As they carefully lifted the Zephyrian onto a stretcher, Rice couldn't help but wonder if she was making the right decision. The war might be over on paper, but bringing an enemy combatant aboard a Terran ship was bound to cause controversy. Back on the horizon, news of their unusual passenger spread quickly. Rice could feel the tension among her crew, a mix of curiosity, fear, and in some cases, anger. She called a meeting of her senior staff to address the situation. "I know this is an unprecedented situation," she began, looking around the conference room at the concerned faces of her officers. "But I want to make one thing clear. As long as that Zephyrian is aboard this ship, it is under our protection and will be treated with the same care and respect we'd show any other patient. Is that understood?" There were nods around the table, though some looked less convinced than others. Dr. Okoye spoke up next. "I've managed to stabilize our guest, but there's still a lot we don't know about Zephyrian biology. I've requested access to the xenobiology databases from Starfleet Medical, but until then, we're operating somewhat in the dark." "Do what you can," Dr. Rice said. "What's its condition?" "Critical, but stable for now. Multiple fractures, internal injuries, severe dehydration, and malnutrition. It's a miracle it survived at all, honestly." Commander Foster leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Captain, I have to ask, what's our endgame here? Are we planning to turn it over to intelligence once we reach the nearest starbase?" Reyes hesitated. It was the logical course of action, but something about it felt wrong. "For now, our priority is to keep it alive and gather what information we can. This Zephyrian might be the last of its kind. There's a lot we could learn." As the meeting continued, down in sick bay, the Zephyrian began to stir. Krell's eyes fluttered open, immediately assaulted by the bright, stereo lights of the medical bay. Panic surged through him as he realized he was no longer on Zephyria. He tried to move, but found himself held in place by some kind of energy field. A face appeared above him, a human face. Krell's warrior instincts screamed at him to fight, to lash out, but his body refused to respond. He could only watch as the human, a female, he thought, began to speak. Her words were incomprehensible to him, but her tone seemed gentle. Dr. Okoye noticed her patient's distress and attempted to calm him. "It's all right," she said softly, knowing he couldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone would convey her meaning. "You're safe. We're trying to help you." Krell's mind raced. He was aboard a human ship, at the mercy of his enemies. Was this to be his fate? To become a prisoner, a subject for experiments or interrogation? He had survived the fall of his world only to face an uncertain and potentially terrible future. But as the human doctor continued to work, her movements careful and her voice soothing, Krell felt his panic begin to subside. There was no aggression in her actions, no sense of threat. Could it be possible that these humans truly meant to help him? As exhaustion overtook him once more, Krell's last conscious thought was one of confusion. Everything he had been taught about humans, everything he had experienced during the war, told him that he should expect only cruelty and violence from these beings. And yet, back on the bridge, Captain Reyes stared out at the stars, lost in thought. She knew that by saving the Zephyrian, she had set in motion events that could have far-reaching consequences. But as she recalled the devastation they had witnessed on the planet's surface, she knew she couldn't have done otherwise. "We're better than this," she murmured to herself. "We have to be." As the Horizon broke orbit and set course for the nearest starbase, it carried with it not just a lone survivor, but a spark of hope for understanding between two species that had known only war. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but perhaps, just perhaps, it would lead to a future brighter than either humans or Zephyrians had dared to imagine. Healing and understanding. Days turned into weeks aboard the U.S. Horizon as it made its way to the nearest starbase. In the ship's medbay, Krell's condition slowly improved under Dr. Okoy's attentive care. The Zephyrian warrior drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind a haze of pain, confusion, and fragmented memories. During his lucid moments, Krell observed the humans around him with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Their behavior puzzled him. Where was the cruelty he had been taught to expect? The doctor and her staff treated him with gentleness and respect, their actions at odds with everything he had believed about these alien beings. As Krell's strength returned, Dr. Okoy began the process of trying to communicate. She enlisted the help of Lieutenant Zara Vega, the ship's linguist and cultural specialist. Together, they worked to bridge the gap between their languages and cultures. "Good morning," Zara said one day, her translator device converting her words into a series of clicks and whistles that approximated Zephyrian speech. "How are you feeling today?" Krell's antennae twitched in surprise. The sounds were crude, but recognizable. "I live," he responded hesitantly. "Why?" Zara tilted her head, not fully understanding. "Why what?" "Why save enemy?" Krell managed, his own grasp of the human language still limited. Zara's expression softened. "Because it was the right thing to do. The war is over. We don't want more death." This concept was foreign to Krell. In Zephyrian culture, mercy towards a defeated foe was seen as weakness, and yet he couldn't deny the care he had received, or the fact that he owed his life to these humans. As the days passed, Krell's interactions with the crew became more frequent. Captain Reyes made it a point to visit him regularly, believing that fostering understanding between their species started with personal connections. During one such visit, Reyes noticed Krell staring at a holographic display of star charts. "You're interested in navigation?" she asked. Krell nodded. "Was pilot," he said, his grammar improving but still broken. "Flew in great battles." Reyes felt a pang of sadness, remembering the devastation they had seen on Zephyria. "I'm sorry about your home," she said softly. Krell's posture stiffened, his compound eyes fixing on her. "Why sorry? You won." "Winning doesn't always feel like victory," Reyes replied, "especially when the cost is so high." This exchange marked a turning point in their relationship. Krell began to see the humans not as faceless enemies, but as complex beings capable of empathy and regret. In turn, the crew of the Horizon came to view Krell not as a dangerous alien, but as a person, different, yet in many ways similar to themselves. As Krell's health improved, Dr. Okoy allowed him limited access to other parts of the ship, always under escort. He marveled at the technology, so different from Zephyrian designs, yet equally advanced in many ways. In the ship's arboretum, he found himself fascinated by the variety of plant life from across the galaxy, including a few specimens from Zephyria itself. It was here, surrounded by a piece of his lost home, that Krell had a profound realization. "Your people," he said to Zara, who had become a frequent companion. collect and preserve life from many worlds. Why? Zara smiled. Because every life form, every culture, has value. We believe that diversity makes us stronger, that there's always more to learn from others. This idea was revolutionary to Krell. The Zephyrian Empire had always seen other species as potential threats or resources to be exploited. The concept of mutual benefit through diversity was entirely new to him. As the horizon neared its destination, tension began to build. The crew had grown accustomed to Krell's presence, but they knew that once they reached the starbase, his fate would be out of their hands. Captain Rice spent long hours in communication with Starfleet Command, arguing for Krell to be treated as a refugee rather than a prisoner of war. Krell, sensing the change in atmosphere, approached Rice in her ready room. His command of English had improved significantly, thanks to Zara's patient tutoring. "Captain," he said, his voice low and serious, "I understand I may be taken away when we reach your base." Rice nodded, her expression grave. "It's a possibility. But I want you to know that I'm doing everything in my power to ensure you're treated fairly." Krell's antennae quivered with emotion. "Why do you fight for me? I was your enemy." "Was," Rice emphasized. "The war is over, Krell. And in the time you've been with us, I've come to believe that there's hope for peace between our peoples. Real, lasting peace, but it has to start somewhere. Why not with us?" Krell was silent for a long moment, processing her words. Finally, he spoke. "On my world, there was a saying, 'The strongest metal is forged in the hottest fire.' Perhaps understanding between us can be forged from the ashes of war." Ray smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope. "I'd like to believe that's true." As the horizon docked at Starbase 47, Krell stood at a viewport, watching the massive structure grow larger. He felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. His time aboard the human ship had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he was no longer the same warrior who had fallen on the battlefields of Zephyria. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Attention all hands," came Captain Ray's voice. "Prepare for docking procedures, and let's show our guest that the spirit of cooperation we've fostered here can extend beyond our bulkheads." As the airlock doors prepared to open, Krell straightened his posture, ready to face whatever came next. He was no longer simply the last survivor of a fallen world. He was, perhaps, the first ambassador of a new era, a bridge between two species that had only known conflict. The doors hissed open, revealing a delegation of Starfleet officials and diplomats. At their head stood an admiral, her expression unreadable. Captain Rice stepped forward, Krell at her side. "Admiral," she said, her voice steady and determined, "I'd like to introduce you to Krell, citizen of Zephyria and honored guest of the U.S. Horizon. We have a lot to discuss." As they stepped onto the starbase, Krell realized that his journey of healing and understanding was far from over. In fact, it might just be beginning. The looming threat. The negotiations on Starbase 47 stretched on for weeks. Krell found himself at the center of heated debates about interspecies relations, war crimes, and the future of galactic politics. Captain Rice and her crew stood by him, advocating for his rights and for the potential he represented as a bridge between their civilizations. It was during one of these tense meetings that an urgent message came through. Admiral Thorne, who had been overseeing the proceedings, interrupted the discussion with a grave expression. "We've just received intelligence that changes everything," she announced. "A previously unknown alien force has been detected on the fringes of our space. They've already destroyed 3 outposts. We believe they may be responsible for the complete annihilation of several species in the Andromeda galaxy." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Krell's antennae twitched nervously. "These new aliens," he asked, "do you have visual data?" When the Admiral brought up the holo display, Krell's compound eyes widened in recognition. "The Harvesters," he whispered, his voice filled with dread. All eyes turned to him. Captain Rice leaned forward. "You know these beings?" Krell nodded slowly. They were legends among my people. Ancient tales spoke of a force that consumed entire civilizations, leaving nothing but barren worlds in their wake. We thought they were myths, cautionary tales to unite our people against external threats. Well, it seems the myths are all too real, Admiral Thorne said grimly, and they're heading straight for the heart of both human and former Zephyrian space. In that moment, the petty squabbles and lingering resentments from the recent war seemed to evaporate. Humans and Krell alike realized they faced a threat that dwarfed their previous conflict. Captain Rice stood up, her eyes blazing with determination. Admiral, with your permission, I'd like to take the Horizon to investigate, and I want Krell to come with us. The Admiral hesitated, then nodded. Granted, but be careful out there. We're dealing with an unknown enemy of immense power. As they prepared to depart, Krell found himself working alongside the very people he once considered mortal enemies. In the ship's labs, he shared what little knowledge his people had about the harvesters, while human scientists compared it with their own findings. Dr. Okoye and Lieutenant Vega worked tirelessly to adapt Zephyrian technology to interface with human systems, creating a hybrid defense grid that they hoped would be more effective against the new threat. On the view screen, they watched in awe as the harvester ships began to falter. The hive mind that coordinated their attacks fragmented, leaving them vulnerable. The Allied fleet pressed their advantage, tearing into the now disorganized enemy. As the last of the harvester ships fell silent, Krell collapsed. The medical team rushed to his side, fighting to save him. For days, he hovered between life and death, his resilient Zephyrian physiology battling against the massive strain he had endured. When Krell finally opened his eyes, he found Captain Rice sitting beside his bed. "Welcome back, hero," she said with a smile. Krell's antennae twitched weakly. "We won." Rice nodded. "Thanks to you. The harvesters have been driven back. And in working together to face this threat, humans and the surviving Zephyrians have forged a bond stronger than anyone thought possible." In the months that followed, as Krell recovered, he watched in amazement as a new era of cooperation bloomed. The technology developed to fight the harvesters led to breakthroughs in medicine, energy production, and space travel. Former enemies became partners in rebuilding and exploration. A year after the battle, Krell stood beside Captain Rice, now Admiral Rice, at the christening of a new ship. The U.S. Unity was the first vessel jointly developed by humans and Zephyrians, a symbol of their newfound alliance. As the ship's sleek hull gleamed in the starlight, Krell reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a warrior bred for conflict, he had become a bridge between worlds, a catalyst for peace. "What are you thinking?" Rice asked, noticing his pensive mood. "I am thinking," Krell replied, "that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a greater one." Rice smiled, gazing out at the stars that now represented not a battlefield, but a frontier of infinite possibilities. "I couldn't agree more, my friend. I couldn't agree more." As the U.S. Unity prepared for its maiden voyage, with a crew of both humans and Zephyrians, Krell felt a sense of hope he had never known before. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and now, united, they were ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities awaited them among the stars.